Hello everyone, we are on the English test of the ACT. That's section 1 of every test. And we're talking today about relevance, clarity, and ambiguity. Now these three ideas, they interlock a lot, and they're also related to the idea of redundancy, which we talked about last lesson. So remember, when we're talking about redundancy, one of the questions we have to ask is, did that information add anything? Did it add anything? Now, sometimes the answer is, well, yes, it did. It was both relevant and clear, and it was not ambiguous. When I can answer it like that, then it's not redundant. And we'll see a couple of examples of that. But in general, these two lessons fit together because in each case you're asking yourself, what is the information that I learned? Did I learn any information? Was the information clear? And was it relevant to what we're talking about? And this is, sometimes these get really strange, these, especially the relevance questions, because when we're talking about relevance, the way the ACT will test relevance is they'll just put a little extra phrase somewhere in there that just seems out of the blue. And as a student, you might be thinking, well, how do I know? Is that okay or not? So this is one of the things you need to start to do is get yourself into the mindset of an editor. You're not just a student for this test. You're not letting the test just wash over you and taking it passively. You want to be aggressive here. And you ask yourself, does this make sense? If I was editing my own work, how would I approach this? The simple concept, sometimes the ACT will add phrases that seem completely random or unexpected. Now, what am I talking about? These examples, possibly a context could support them, right? Maybe they would make sense, but in general, this is what we're talking about. In December, the same month as my birthday, the naval base at Pearl Harbor was attacked. Okay, now you're wondering, why am I talking about my birthday when I'm talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor? Now, it's possible in an essay that you write, you're talking about things that happen in your birthday month. And so you bring up, the Pearl Harbor attack. But if the essay is about Pearl Harbor or about those events, those historical events, there's no reason to mention your birthday. And that's the sort of random material that the ACT will just throw in there. So for the relevance idea, sometimes it's important to look around a few sentences up, or one sentence up really, never more than one, and one sentence down to see, is there any reason to mention my birthday or is this completely random information? Wolves and coyotes travel in packs. Sometimes my sister carries a pack of gum. Again, you're going to hope one of the answer choices is just a period and crosses this whole thing out because it's a totally different definition of the word pack. Why would they possibly be related? It's just sort of silly, and I think you'll find a lot of the questions that test relevance on the ACT are in fact just sort of silly. And we'll see plenty of examples, but we're going to get all of these ideas out there, relevance, clarity, and ambiguity, because usually if one's tested, one of those other ones is tested, and there's a lot of overlap. So let's talk about some of these other ideas. In general, remember with redundancy, we said more words are not better if those words just repeat the same information. For redundancy, we say more words are not better if those words repeat information that I've already been given. Flip side of that, same side of the other coin, other side of the same coin, is clarity. If that information actually does help, and if it's clear and relevant, then it's good. So let's take an example. Recently I bought a motorcycle versus last month I bought a motorcycle. Both are fine grammatically. Both are actually pretty clear, but this one adds more clarity. Last month says how recently? Do you mean recently within 6 months, a couple of days ago? So it says last month. So this is a clarifying phrase. Recently is good. It would be fine by itself, but if I'm given the choice between recently and last month, I want the one that adds clarity. It makes it more specific, more clear. I have only been to New York a few times. I've only been to New York 3 times. Same idea there. A few is a little vague. It's ambiguous. It's not bad. It would be fine on its own. The only time you would ever be tested on this is when you have this option to clarify. So remember, if the information is relevant and it clarifies something, it's good. It's not the same as a redundancy. It's actually better. So ambiguity is also the flip side of clarity. Now sometimes they'll try to add information, but that information doesn't add clarity. In fact, it removes clarity. So ambiguous means it has more than one possible meaning, and it comes up all over the ACT. And whenever you're not clear what something's talking about, that's ambiguity. And it can happen with pronouns, with modifiers, with nouns, sometimes with verbs, but these are the big ones that show up on the ACT. All right, take a look at a couple examples. Pronouns. In Camden, they built a new aquarium that promises to make them a vibrant tourist city. Now, we're going to have a lesson on pronouns, and you can see what the issues are here. It's the they and the them. Remember, Camden is a city. Camden is a city, it's singular. Camden is a city and it's singular, so these plural pronouns, they and them, and we'll talk about this in our pronoun lesson at more length, but these plural pronouns make it ambiguous. Suddenly, I don't know who you're talking about. Who do you mean? The city planners? Do you mean the whole population? Do you mean the people who run aquariums? I don't know. So by using that pronoun, they, them, you've introduced ambiguity into the sentence. You've basically said, well, you knew what I was talking about. I was talking about Camden. Now you don't know what I'm talking about. Mrs. Clarkson gave my sister a higher grade than, now I put I or me here because the use of I or me can clear up an ambiguity. It's a great distinction between clarity versus ambiguity. This has two potential meanings. If I say Mrs. Clarkson gave my sister a higher grade than I, that means I'm giving grades. And Mrs. Clarkson's giving grades. So maybe I'm my sister's teacher. Right? So that would mean Mrs. Clarkson gave my sister a higher grade than I did. If I say Mrs. Clarkson gave my sister a higher grade than me, that means me and my sister are both students. So notice how this, again, we'll talk about more about this in our pronoun lesson, but notice how this, the choice of pronouns, can either lead to an ambiguity or lead to a clarity. Similarly, Denise and Charlotte bought some toffee, which eventually caused her to break a filling. All right. So now, you might think the which is the source of ambiguity here, but it's not. The which is fine, it refers to toffee. Again, we'll see that in our pronoun lesson. Here is the ambiguity. The her, the simple her. So notice this one. Camden is singular. You use a plural pronoun, you introduce ambiguity. Same here. Denise and Charlotte are both they're two people, and so they're a plural subject. I introduce a singular pronoun, it makes a new ambiguity. What's the ambiguity? I don't know who broke a filling. Was it Denise or was it Charlotte? Don't know. It's ambiguous. So these are all ways that pronouns can lead to ambiguity. And these are how these get fixed. So this is really easy. In Camden, a new aquarium was built that promises to make them a vibrant tourist city. Again, the them is still there. But notice what I did up here is I took away the they and I just made it passive. So instead of saying they built a new aquarium, I just say a new aquarium was built. So I remove the subject altogether. Here, as we discussed, we put in me instead of I. And in here, we just put in the right girl's name. It's Denise who broke a filling. All right, modifiers. Now this is a huge source of ambiguity. Also, there's some overlap here with our modifier and adjective adverb lesson. Let's take a look at some of these examples because modifiers are tricky to understand. But basically, whenever you have a phrase that describes something in a sentence, maybe it describes the action or maybe it describes one of the nouns in the sentence, it's a modifier. Let's take a look. So the benches near the soccer field, which had just been painted, sparkled in the sun. What's the modifier? Okay, this is the modifier. Which had just been painted is the modifier. And what does it do? Well, as we're going to learn again in the pronoun lesson, it modifies the last noun. It modifies the last noun, which is the soccer field. Now, why is this ambiguous? Because I know what the writer here means. The writer means that the benches were painted. The writer means that the benches were painted. But if I read this in a strictly grammatical way, it sounds like the soccer field was painted. The benches near the soccer field, which had just been painted. So in other words, I interrupted this noun phrase, and it's not entirely clear from this writing if the author means that the benches have been painted or the soccer field had been painted. Because sometimes they do paint soccer fields. They paint the logos of other teams, etc. So this is ambiguous. Ambiguous. Now, probably he means the benches, and you can get that from context most of the time, but this is a grammatical ambiguity that you need to be aware of. So the which had just been painted is a modifier for either field or benches, and I'm not sure which. Next, losing about a third of its biomass every decade, it is imperative that the deforestation of the Amazon be curtailed. Okay, so this one is a little weird grammatically, but the ambiguity is clear. Losing about a third of its biomass every decade, that's a phrase that modifies the next noun. But the next noun is it. And I'm not sure what it stands for. Does it stand for the Amazon? Does it stand for deforestation? Or does it stand for the fact that this is imperative? Now, the only thing that you need to take away from this is when you start a clause with it, and especially with it is, and you're talking about some broad situation like it is good that, or it is beneficial that. Almost always there's some latent ambiguity there. So be very, very careful with ambiguity when you have a phrase followed by it. Under the doctor's care, Christine's prognosis quickly improved. Again, same idea. You have this opening modifier under the doctor's care. But the prognosis, remember, prognosis is what a doctor gives you. It says, oh, you're going to be okay. Or, oh, you have 3 weeks to live. Prognosis is not under the doctor's care. It's Christine who's under the doctor's care. Or in any case, it's ambiguous. It's ambiguous here. You want to believe that it's Christine under the doctor's care, but grammatically, we're talking about the prognosis. So we can take a look at how to change these, but more importantly is just to be on the lookout for these ambiguities, especially in the wrong answer choices, because they're not going to fix them perfectly. The recently painted benches near the soccer field sparkled in the sun. Notice, I just got rid of the phrase, and I used the whole thing, recently painted benches. I used the whole thing as an adjective or a modifier for benches. With the Amazon losing about a third of its biomass every decade, it is imperative that the deforestation be curtailed. So I make it clear, it's the Amazon who's losing the biomass. With the doctor's care, Christine's prognosis quickly improved. So again, I make it clear that I'm talking about Christine, not the prognosis. Okay, the last type of ambiguity we're going to look at today is with nouns. And this is similar to the ones we saw with pronouns, but sometimes you can make it ambiguous without introducing a pronoun. So let's take a look. Bill and Ted, presented with the impossible task of finishing a history project on time, must seek supernatural help and become an intrepid time traveler. Now look, we have Bill and Ted becoming an intrepid time traveler. This is singular, an intrepid time traveler, but Bill and Ted is plural. So again, I'm not sure, do they both have to become intrepid time travelers? Or is it just one of them? And if so, which one? It's ambiguous. It's introduced an ambiguity by not having these nouns line up correctly. Now this one's even clearer. As a clown, it is easy for Klaus to make fun of VJ. Now think about it. Who's the clown? Klaus or VJ? Well, maybe Klaus is the clown and he makes fun of people all the time. So it's easy for him to make fun of VJ. Maybe VJ is the clown, and that's why it's so easy for Klaus to make fun of him, because everybody makes fun of clowns. I don't know which one the clown is, so this introduces an ambiguity, even though neither Klaus nor VJ is referred to by a pronoun. Now again, you don't need to know how to fix all this stuff right now. All you need to do is have this on your radar, and as we'll see in these questions, these ambiguities can come up in lots of different ways, and almost always they're tested along with something else. They're usually tested along with clarity, along with pronouns, sometimes along with commas or redundancies. So it's just sort of a tool in your tool belt to help you maybe identify an extra wrong answer choice, maybe point you in the right direction towards fixing whatever the grammatical problem in the problem is, or maybe just sort of seeing it in the passage as you read it and having it on high alert that you want to look for a different answer choice. But again, be on the lookout for ambiguities. They're all over this test.